women. I don't think we even introduced the podcast the last recording we did. I'm just realizing it's fine, whatever.
The people know who we are. Hopefully.
If they found us on the internet, they know what they're getting into. But, you know, just in case, we'll try to be professional. Muscle Science for Women podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Ashleigh. This is Rachel. She's great. We're talking about blood tests and how I maybe should get one soon, but I've been putting it off, and I'm still using the excuse that when I was pregnant, I had to get my blood taken like every month, and I don't enjoy it. Like I'm not afraid of needles. I do have a little bit of that like low blood pressure reaction to getting my blood taken, which sucks. Like I get like a couple more than usual vials and I'm like, oh, here we go. Like I just kind of get a little woozy. So I don't like it. And I had to do it so many times that it really was just like, I'm done with this for a while after I had the baby, but I feel like I should. It might be something that would be good for me. Like, again, kind of kickstarting being like, whatever my new fit is post baby to like, actually get some like benchmark stuff taken, because I feel fine. But you never know kind of what's going on underneath the hood unless you get some blood work done.
Yeah. And we are going to talk about that today because there are pros and cons and things to be aware of when it comes to any type of testing. Do
you want to dive into that now or do you want to wait until later? Because we were going to talk about that later.
Let's wait. So, you got to listen to the whole podcast to get
the good stuff. Let's start off the top with something
too, though.
Yeah, let's start off the top with something not as educational, but I'm very excited about pop culture. There is a show as of today, as of recording, that is on Netflix that I am super pumped to watch. And it is a documentary about the American Gladiators, the show.
Oh,
okay. Did you watch this when you were younger? Do you have like any reference? Like, were you into it at all? Not really. Okay. That's fine. That's okay.
I watched the real world and like real world road rules, whatever, where they do like the challenges and they're
get out of here. Okay. Get out of here right now. I've never even watched that, but I know it's not the same. I'm just going to just smooth right by that. Okay. Listen, I mean, maybe because I'm a little bit older than you too, honestly. So I think you might've just like missed it entirely. There was like a next iteration. There was like a newer American Gladiators that I don't think did quite as well, but I think it was in the 80s. I don't even really remember. I was young too when it first came out, but it was like, if you look back at like clips of it or whatever, it was just like the most quintessential, like, I guess 80s or early 90s, like they were wearing spandex. They had so much hair. The whole point is like these beautiful, like over the top, like roided out, gladiators who would like do these challenges, right? Like against normal people, but it was normal fit people. But the normal fit people always looked like very normal in comparison to these like big jacked gladiators. And of course there were women gladiators too. And they all had amazing names. Like, I don't know, like Blaze and whatever. Anyway, it was ridiculous. It was very like America, just over the top. And I think maybe because I had like older brothers and I like grew up being very into like Arnold Schwarzenegger movies and like, I don't know, just American Gladiators, like that kind of stuff, wrestling and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so I always really liked it. And I really enjoyed it. And it was like, I joke, and I still joke to this day about how that would have been like a career for me, was to be an American Gladiator, despite the fact that I am absolutely not large enough. Even if I got jacked up on steroids, I'm way too small to be like an effective gladiator. Like these were big people, right? But it was just like kind of a moment in time, I think culturally, whatever. And so Netflix I haven't watched it yet, but they have this like documentary, like looking at the show. And I don't know if they're going to like interview some of these people. Oh my God, I'm so excited. I can't wait. So I know that I'm sorry, I'm speaking to somebody who's like not interested at all, but I'm going to watch it and I'm going to report back because again, like as somebody who has a bit of a like old school muscle head mentality, I like to think that I'm a little bit more on the like old school side of things. And this is part of it. It's just so ridiculous and like silly, but it was funny. And like for somebody like me who always, it's funny to say this, but I just feel like I liked pieces of like pop culture that like a lot of my girlfriends like couldn't relate to. Like I had crushes on like these big over the top, like buff, ridiculous characters when all of my friends like loved, I don't know, like Leonardo DiCaprio and like Romeo and Juliet. And I'm just like, what? No. Like, so anyway, so this kind of stuff is just like, so I just love it. It makes me so happy, the nostalgia of it. So I'm very excited to watch and see if it tells me anything interesting about these people or like the production of the show or something. But that's my like pop culture reference of the day. I'm very pumped about it.
Love it. I am pumped for you.
Thank you. Thank you. I listen another, like, just so you like know what kind of person I am. When I was competing in bodybuilding, the like morning of or the day before the show, when I was like getting ready and like, I don't know, getting myself pumped up, I would literally watch Pumping Iron, which is the Arnold Schwarzenegger, like the classic movie showing how he competed, because he's just this, I mean, he's a very different person now, I think, as an older gentleman. We won't get into that. But back in the day, he was just this, again, ridiculous, over the top character. And I loved it. So anyway, super excited for that. I'll report back. But I do have some other questions from our listeners that we can chat about. One, I feel like we may have touched on this, but maybe not, and we can always talk about it again. This person is asking about fasted training early in the morning. Is it better to eat or get, she's saying, the minimum 12 hours gut rest? So I think she's assuming that like that's like sort of the minimum time overnight that's like ideal for you to not be eating. And this is a very common question a lot of people ask, like, especially for fat loss, but just general health, energy. Like, is it good to do a workout in the morning fasted, or is it better to fuel yourself before a workout?
Yeah. So this is, I mean, usually I work out around like noonish. So I get usually a good meal in. But today, as I mentioned, had some stuff, and I actually worked out earlier. And I don't know if you saw my story. You probably didn't, because I'll just tell you about it now. But so I didn't have time to get like a normal pre-workout meal in, any meal at all, actually. But I knew yesterday that was going to be the case. So last night I made sure that I had a little bit more carbs at dinner. I made like jicama tacos, but I made sure like in my protein ice cream, I had strawberries. So I had like some berries. And so made sure just like ended the night with like fueled up, right? So enough carbs and things like that, which this is one thing to realize too. Like if you're going into a fasted workout, thinking about what you ate the day before is actually really important too. So that's like one thing to help with that. Is like, okay, did you fuel up the night before, like at dinner? Did you have enough carbs? Obviously protein, fat, things like that. So because we know that that's going to be stored in your glycogen, which is really where we're going to get the energy for that fasted workout. Even more so than if you were to eat a meal right before the workout. You'll get a little bit of energy, obviously, and then from those carbs and things like that. But that's not going to get stored like in your glycogen right away, right? So glycogen is the storage form of carbs and glucose and all that fancy stuff. So what you do the previous day is important. And then going back to what I mentioned today, or what I mentioned about this morning, is that I actually had a leg day today, right? So especially it also depends on like the kind of workout you're doing. We know that a lower body day is going to be a lot more taxing to your nervous system and require more energy than maybe an upper body workout. And it's mostly just because the muscle groups in your lower body are going to be a lot bigger than the upper body typically. And just a lot more taxing, like I said, to the nervous system. So today I had a lower body day. We talked about this before, maybe off air. And I had like my coffee and a little bit of creamer, and I was like, okay, I'm just like, I keep a candy stash in my gym bag.
Yes,
like
we talked about this in another episode.
We talked about this. Yeah. So I fueled up enough last night that I thought that I was going to be just fine going into the workout, and like had a little coffee, caffeine, right? A little boost of that, a little cream my coffee, whatever. And then I was like, okay, I'll just get a good post-workout meal in afterwards. But I did my first set of squats, pendulum squats, and I was like, oh man, like I need some energy. So I took out my little Sour Patch, like the little mini ones, and there's like 4 in there. And I had 2 Sour Patch, literally 2 Sour Patch Kids, and put the rest away. And I was like, okay, I'll probably just eat these like in another 5 minutes. I'll eat the rest of the 2. And I forgot about that, right? Like I forgot that I had the extra 2, and I just needed those 2 little Sour Patches to like just give me that little boost. And I was feeling really good throughout the whole workout. And then I realized towards the end of the workout, I was like, oh, I didn't even finish like the pack. And I didn't need it. Like I didn't feel like I needed it. I was like, oh, I'm just going to go home and have this great post-workout meal with lots of nutrients and stuff. So we kind of talked about this before, but it was like some people will like use this as an excuse to like eat candy, right? And I'm like, you know that if you forget about the candy and you're like into your workout, that like you needed it for the energy, right? Versus like, oh, I get to eat candy, so I'm just gonna like eat all the candy, whatever. So that was just kind of like a mental thing for me. It was like, okay, yeah, like my body needed this little extra energy that I wasn't even like thinking about how much of it I was eating. It was just like, okay, give me what I need and use that. And that's what happened. So that's another little trick too, like keeping like a quick source of sugar, glucose, right, from the Sour Patch. Obviously it's not going to be like the ideal, but it worked. And then I came home and had a post-workout meal. So that's kind of what I would say. Like there's so many different ways to answer this question, but it's like knowing yourself too, like how you feel during your workout. If you do a fasted workout and you do this multiple times and you feel like crap, like that probably means that you probably need to get a little bit more fuel in before. And you can even do like a quick, like banana and a little bit of peanut butter, right, on the way to the gym. Very fast digesting stuff. You can do like a rice cake with peanut butter and have like maybe half a protein shake, right? A scoop of protein in your water and drink that before or during. So there's so many different things. And we go into this in the Muscle Science Forum program about fueling. Like we have a whole, lesson about going through post workout, how to optimize your training, all of that. But yeah, I'll shut up because I'm talking a lot.
No, that was great. I mean, I think, with all due respect, anybody who can open a mini candy bag and only eat half of it and then put it away and forget is a serial killer. You're a serial killer. Okay.
Like that.
What psycho can have like, oh, there's like 4 little treats. I'm just going to eat 2 and then forget the other 2. What? Come on. That's like the same person who can like open a chocolate bar and eat half of it and put the other half away for like 3 days. Who are you people? Okay. That's my question.
This is the first time that's happened. I will say that. Usually I eat the whole pack. But then I realized, I was like, oh crap. Like I put it in my side pocket of my bag and I forgot because I was like so into the workout and I was like,
no, I love it. I love it. But you make a good point.
Good way.
Obviously, like, and I think that other point is like, it may not need to be this big, massive meal. It may sometimes a little bit goes a long way, but just reiterate what you're saying. I think like, it depends on the type of workout. I mean, I think most of us generally, you can go for a nice long walk, even a little bike ride or something. Just make sure you're hydrated. Like you probably don't need to, because there's 2 ends of the spectrum here, right? There are people who are like, how much working out can I get away with as little fuel as possible because I want to be super lean, right? Which isn't the best way to look at things. And then there are people who are like, oh, getting out of bed, got to eat a meal. Like going over here, got to eat a meal, which is sort of the more direction that I tend to lean towards, which you don't need as much fuel maybe as we've been led to believe that we do. And, without getting into the like sort of moral or emotional aspects that are so intertwined in eating, like I don't think we need to preach this idea that you have to like earn your carbs, like a lot of people say. However, you don't, like if you look at it more like fuel instead of like just food you're putting into your body because it tastes good, if you really think about it as fuel, do you need this fuel for what you're going to do? How much of it do you need? Like, are you doing this because it tastes good and because it feels good or because it's routine? Or do you need this fuel? Is this going to optimize what you're doing? And in some cases, eating less maybe will make you feel better for a workout, sometimes not. So it really is very individual. And I think, like you said, you just need to experiment and see. Like if I, when I was fitter and like doing more activity and was trying to be lean, I would usually do some kind of movement in the morning, walking, hiking, going somewhere, whatever. And like, I wouldn't necessarily eat before I did that. If I was going to go to the gym and like crush a bodybuilding workout, I'm going to eat, I'm going to make sure I'm fueled for that. So yeah, I think that's answers that good enough. I don't know.
And I would say this too, 9 out of 10 times, especially on a leg day, like even if it is early in the morning, I would probably have like a rice cake with some peanut butter, maybe like a protein shake on the way to the gym. But today it was just like a weird scenario where I wasn't hungry at all. And I like actually didn't even have, didn't go grocery shopping. So I'm doing that later. So, but yeah, I have like a backup, right? Always having kind of like a backup plan. And I probably honestly would have had a shitty workout if I didn't have just like 2 Sour Patches, just because not only from like the energy standpoint, but like I would have been in my head a little bit more. So there's like a placebo effect. I don't have
the energy to do this. Yeah.
There's a placebo effect to it.
Yeah.
That I think is another thing that people forget about too. So anyway, lots of different options there.
These are the two types of people in the world, the people who can have workout candy stashes in their bag and not eat it unless they need to. And then the people like me who would like buy that and put it in their bag and then just eat it all that night just because they, it was there. Because that's actually 100% what I would do.
Yeah. And also last week, this is funny because one of my friends is a type 1 diabetic and she was getting low blood sugar while we were waiting to eat after our basketball game. And like nobody had anything. And I was like, oh, well, I got 3 packets of Sour Patch Kids. Here you go.
I mean,
she's like, where'd you get these? These are perfect. I'm like, I stock up on Halloween when they have the mini, they have huge bags of like just the mini ones because they're perfect.
Yeah. You are a very useful person to have around for a lot of reasons. And the number one reason is mini candy. Oh my.
And salt. I always have the little salt.
I've always got salt. Yeah. I've always got salt. And I also always have wipes for my babies. Oh, okay. That's useful. You need that. You never know when you're going to be covered in something disgusting. So we're both useful people
from
different
yourself
reasons.
Or somebody else. Who knows?
Exactly. You just don't know when you leave the house. Okay. Here's a question. Should you rest between bilateral exercises like split squats, rest between the legs? Yeah. So like you do, your reps on one leg, do you rest or do you go right in? I would say you go right into it, right? Unless of course you're like beasting yourself so badly that you need a break. I don't know. You shake them out and then you go to the other one. No?
I disagree, but I think it depends, right? So it depends on what the goal is, right?
It always depends. Yeah.
That always depends. And I would just say like, especially for things like, and again, I'll talk about this. Like I did B stance pendulum squats this morning and I rested 1 minute in between each leg.
Can you just tell people what that is so they know what you're talking about?
Yeah. So it's a squat, a pendulum squat. It's just a machine type squat. Yes. And I did B stance.
A very cool machine.
Yeah. Instead of having both legs up, I did like one kind of like staggered stance. B stance is basically staggered stance. So you can do like B stance RDLs. You can do B stance things, different things. So I did that on the pendulum. And I took 1 minute rest in between legs. And the reason for that is because I'm trying to basically get as much out of each leg as possible. And we know that especially with the lower body, your nervous system and just like your heart rate will go up, especially, if you're training legs and your heart rate's not going up a bit, like probably not training hard enough. Not saying that you have to go like crazy, but you should be kind of, huffing and puffing a little bit, especially if it's a longer set. So for example, like today I was doing 12, 10, 8. So like 12 reps each side, which is kind of a lot, especially for that type of movement. I personally recommend taking rest in between each leg so that you can get the most out of it. Because if you do one leg first, obviously that's going to be the fresh leg. And then you go right into the next one. What is the limiting factor, right? The limiting factor, there's going to be the cardiovascular aspect of that. That's going to limit you in that second limb that we don't necessarily want if the goal is to maximize the muscle building potential of that second limb. So this comes back to like adequate rest between any set, but also especially during like unilateral work. That's my opinion. However, if you are doing a workout because you are focused on a little bit more of like the cardiovascular side, maybe you're doing more of like a pump focus workout where it's like a shorter rest periods, things like that, then maybe you wouldn't want to rest in between. But again, always go back to like, what's the primary goal of what you're doing? And then you line things up based off of that.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of thinking more, I don't know why, but I was kind of thinking more like, higher rep, lower weight, like pump kind of movements that you wouldn't want to rest in between. Of course, it makes sense if you're really trying to like get a lot of output, heavier weights, whatever. But also to revise even what I was saying at the beginning, the other kind of limiting factor I find, like I think about, for example, like a B stance RDL, right? If you're doing your right leg first, whatever, and you switch to your left, like that back leg is a bit of a limiting factor too. And that back leg is now tired in a way that the other side wasn't because they were both fresh at the beginning. Does that, you know what I mean? So like, I'm actually kind of revising what I'm thinking that could be problematic. You kind of need to like give both legs a break before you do the other leg because they're both still involved, even if there's one leg that's the focus. So I guess
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I always start, like most of us have one leg that's a little bit stronger than the other. So I typically will always start and do my weak leg first.
Mm-hmm.
So my right leg is weaker than my left in like all areas, quads, glutes, right side, I mean. And that's the benefit of actually doing unilateral movements, which we talk about in the glute program. Sign up for the glute program if you haven't already.
Yes.
In the show notes.
Yes.
But I always start with the weaker side first. And I think there's a benefit from both a mental standpoint and from just like, obviously it's the weaker side first. So you'll have, even though you're taking that 1 minute rest, it's not going to be as much as like maybe you took 2 to 3 minutes rest between the set. Right. Mm-hmm. So doing the weaker side first so that you have a little bit left, a little bit more in the tank because the stronger side, you're already going to be tired. So like, at least you have a little bit more there for that second side. But also from a mental standpoint, you're like, okay, I got the weaker side out of the way.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of push with the stronger side. So that's usually what I do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and I think I wonder, like, I don't know if a lot of people are actually, when they're taking rest, are they actually like paying attention to how long the rest is? Because that's the other area where you can get messed up if you're not being meticulous with it. Like some people think they're taking like a 30-second to 1 minute rest and then they're on Instagram and then don't realize I'm sitting there for 5 minutes, which again, like sort of no judgment, but if you want to be like maximizing what you're doing, you want to be paying attention and like knowing what the rest is. And since a rest can be, your rest periods can be a factor that you can play with and lessen or add to as needed, depending on what your goal is, you want to know how much you're resting to and be actually paying attention to that, just like you're paying attention to sets and reps, because all of these factors matter, right?
Yeah. And quick tip too, with the rest, and this is, again, there's a lot of things that I did this morning that we're talking about, but what I do, especially with squats and things that I know, like lower body squats, RDLs, I know my heart rate's going up during that set. What I do is I have my Apple Watch and I do like the workout thing because it shows me like my heart rate right there, like the whole time. So I'll look at my heart rate before I start the set. And I did this with between my legs. So I did take a little bit more than a minute actually between. I'll look at what my heart rate is. I did my one set, right? I'll look at what my heart rate is when I end that set. And typically it's higher. Mm-hmm. And so I'll wait until my heart rate goes back down to what it was when I started the set previously, right? So it goes back to baseline, right? You're just waiting for it to go back to baseline or at least close to that. Because again, that's like your cardiovascular system. That's like your nervous system saying like, okay, I'm up here. Like I need to recover. Right. And so once it hits baseline, then it's like, okay, I'm going to go into the next set or the next leg. Yeah. So that's a really like objective way to see if you're recovered before you go to your next set, is like, let your heart rate come down to what it was at baseline before you started. So yeah.
I like it. All right. Do you have a question? I have one other question, but I want to save it to the next podcast. I'll tell you about it offline because it's going to need to take some research, but I do want to talk about it. So I'll just have to tease that for next week because we're not ready to answer it.
All right. Yeah. And I have 2 questions here. So let's just do one of the questions that I have that's related to kind of the blood work stuff. And then this other question we can save for the next time too. If that works.
Sure.
Okay. So Kristen emailed us, and if you're listening to this, you can email us questions, at, musclescience4women@gmail.com. So Kristen and we don't have to say your name, but if you don't,
tell us if you don't want to, or otherwise we might say just your first name. Just your first name.
Yeah. So Kristen said, "Hi, Ashleigh and Rachel. I really enjoyed your podcast, or I really enjoy your podcast. It's always thorough, thoughtful, and entertaining." Love to hear that. She said, "Thank you for all of the great info. I have a couple questions about hormone replacement therapy, or more specifically hormone testing, and I'm curious to learn what you've seen in your research on this topic." So Kristen, I'm going to read out one of your questions, and then we're going to save your second question for the next podcast because they're both kind of, we can talk about them for a little bit. So the first question is there a particular type of testing that is best, most accurate, and most helpful? I recently did a woman's hormone test through Everlywell, which is both a blood and a saliva test, but I'm wondering if that's any better, worse, or different than other options. So,
okay, you start.
Okay. So this is a great question. There's tons of different rabbit holes we can go down, but we're going to kind of keep it at pretty high level here. The quick answer to this, and this is, for any testing that you're doing, is that no test is perfect, right? Whether it's blood, saliva, urine, whatever. No test is perfect. They all have limitations, some more than others. So it's good to kind of understand why you're doing the test, what specific markers you're looking at, understanding that there's limitations to those tests. And then specifically for females, and specifically if we're talking about hormone testing, like if you're looking at your progesterone and testosterone and estrogen levels and FSH and LH and those things, a lot of the time the results, especially if you're doing a blood test, are going to depend on when that test is done in relation to a woman's cycle, right?
Yeah.
Because for women, we are, whether you're a normal cycling woman or you're in perimenopause, postmenopause, whatever, like our hormones are going, they're fluctuating throughout the day, throughout the month, especially. And so that's important to understand when you're getting the testing done in relation to your personal cycle, like what part of your cycle you're in during that month. And then also in relation to where you're at in your life, right? Like, are you cycling normally, right? Or are you in perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, right? Those are things that we have to understand. But like, regardless of the test that you're using, at least from my research, if you're in your perimenopausal years, and especially because she mentioned let me look here. She didn't mention the age, but if you are in perimenopause, and especially with relating to like hormone replacement therapy and things like this, I'm assuming she's in perimenopause. That's something to be aware of too, because a lot of the testing can be super, super unreliable there, especially with blood testing, because in perimenopausal years, like your hormones can fluctuate minute to minute, right? Second to second. And so if you get one blood draw at one point in time and you have a certain level, like that's not telling you what's happening even the rest of the day, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be very, very careful. And this is a downside, I would say, to blood testing when it comes to perimenopause, especially, or if you are irregular cycling and things like that, because that's a snapshot in time. It doesn't tell you what's happening, what's fluctuating. And this is going to be especially for like hormones, like I said, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, FSH, LH, those things. When it comes to like thyroid specific markers, like all the thyroid panels, I think that's a little bit more reliable when it comes to blood testing, at least from my research. But we have to kind of, again, take those with a grain of salt and understand when you're doing the testing and what stage of life you're in with that. And then I have some other insights on like saliva and urine testing that I want to talk high level about, but do you have anything that you want to add?
No, I mean, I've read, I mean, maybe you're going to get into this, but I've read that urine testing is a bit more accurate for like, especially sex hormones for women. And I know like have you ever done the Dutch test? We've talked about this. Have you done it?
I have done the Dutch test years ago, back in 2018.
Okay. Did you
but
find that good?
So at least from my current research, I've actually now been a little bit weary of the Dutch test for some different reasons. And some of that comes from the type of actual testing that they're doing. With like spot urine tests or spot blood tests, there can be a lot of inaccuracies with some of that stuff. And again, it's just like the more you know.
This is why I like understand why people get overwhelmed and don't do it, myself included, because it's like there's so much, if you don't do it perfectly and everybody's doing it wrong, and it's especially for women, like you said, we have to test at different points in our cycle and we have to like be so on top of this stuff. It gets really overwhelming. It's like, this is more trouble than it's worth. And if I'm not confident that the information I'm getting is going to be accurate and useful to me, I'd rather just not do it. It sucks. It sucks that it's like so difficult.
Yeah. I agree. But, and I think that there is again, there's pros and cons to all of this. But speaking to the urine testing side of things. So from my research, I've recently, like in the last few months, just all the stuff that I've kind of been reading about and like comparing the Dutch test to like some other testing, I've learned at least, and again, I'm not an expert in HRT and hormones and things like that, but from the experts that I've been, studying, it's been a consensus that at least right now, for those who are hormone specialists, especially HRT specialists, that 24-hour urine testing seems to be the most reliable method for testing hormones. And this is when you're basically testing, you're taking urine samples throughout a 24-hour period, right? And there's different specific companies and labs that do this. So you're taking actual urine tests throughout the 24 hours to see kind of how hormones are fluctuating, things like that. However, this other thing to think about too, again, if you are a woman who is trying to test your levels because you're in perimenopause and you're like, I want to test my levels because I want to see if, whether you're taking HRT or you are, you want to start taking it, actually, it can be detrimental to check your levels even in urine testing because they are going to naturally fluctuate day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute, right? So this is where working with a specialist who knows what to look at is very important. And one of the biggest things is your symptoms, right? So being able to track your symptoms with what you're doing, especially if you are starting HRT, because at least from the experts that I've been learning from, they actually don't check. They don't rely on testing, any type of testing before they put you on HRT. They want you to basically, obviously they'll do some tests, but they will take it with a grain of salt and they will ask you and have like a full kind of comprehensive thing about your symptoms, right? What are the symptoms that you're having? Because that's really going to tell us like the individuality. And if you do start HRT, for example, how are these symptoms being relieved? And then once you've kind of found some relief from that and you can kind of get on a steady dose that's working for you, then you do the testing. Then you do the 24-hour urine testing to make sure that your levels are within a good place and they're not too high or too low. So it's kind of like, okay, the step-by-step process. Sometimes if you're not working with a skilled practitioner who is a specialist in this, they might be doing it a little bit backwards. And I'm not saying that I'm an expert here, but you have to kind of look at all these things and take into account and understand, like, it makes sense, right? If you're fluctuating all over the place and you take even just a 1-day 24-hour urine test, even though that's the technically gold standard, it's still only 1 day, right? So paying attention to symptoms, being able to track that, and also, like, there's a downfall, at least I've seen this, and I'll shut up after this. But this is a red flag. If you go to your practitioner, you get your blood work done and you're like, I'm interested in, like, I have all these symptoms, right? Have hot flashes. I'm not sleeping, blah, blah, blah. All the symptoms that come with perimenopause for some people. And you go get a blood test done and your levels are quote unquote normal. And then your practitioner says, hey, your levels are normal. You don't need HRT. That's a red flag because you're having all these symptoms. So something's going on. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, oh, like, your levels are quote unquote normal. And then they deny you that. Yeah. That's not okay. And that's what some people fall into. So again, it's like, the more you know with these.
And things. That's a big problem in women's medical experience, is basically being like, their symptoms being downplayed, being told like either you're over exaggerating or maybe you're imagining it or whatever, so anybody who tells you, like, if you're experiencing something and they're like, no, you're not really, or we don't have any evidence for it, like, that's not what you're supposed to hear. And you deserve better than that. But I guess just to kind of summarize, because again, this is high level, this is not medical advice, but to summarize, like, going back to her question, like, what advice do you give her?
Yeah. So, and let me just say one more thing, because we didn't talk about saliva, and I'm not going to dive into this, but generally saliva is not going to be reliable for a multitude of reasons. There's lots of limitations on it. Not saying that it's absolutely like you can't take any information from that, but from what I've researched compared to urine and blood, saliva has a lot more limitations. So what I would recommend is, again, what is the goal of this testing, right? Why are you testing your hormones? Are you having symptoms, right? Are you having symptoms here? What are you testing, right? Are you testing sex hormones like progesterone, estrogen, DHEA, testosterone? Do you know, like, are you a regular cycling woman? Because if you are, then you need to be testing those, and your doctor will know this. You'll need to be testing those at certain parts of your cycle. Like, for example, on day 3 of your menstrual cycle is typically a time when you would test FSH and LH levels. And then, like, I don't know the exact days, they're like day 18, whatever, because these are supposed to be doing kind of like the normal fluctuations right throughout the month. And so you would test those levels at those times to see where they are in terms of like the reference ranges of that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So then if you're a woman who is not regularly cycling, if you're in perimenopause, postmenopause, or even if you don't have regular periods, right? Maybe you are suffering from amenorrhea or something like that, then with that, you have to take those numbers with a grain of salt, because again, it's a snapshot in time and it can't tell you a lot from that. So in that case, doing like a 24-hour urine test or things like that can be potentially beneficial. But then again, symptoms, right? Going back to symptoms, if you are suffering with symptoms, then you have to think about, okay, what's the goal? What am I looking to relieve here? And basically finding a skilled practitioner who can kind of walk you through this process and help you with that. That would kind of be my recommendations. And then when it comes to testing other things like other hormones, thyroid, different, all the different complete thyroid panel, blood testing will be kind of the gold standard for that. Because that will show you there's like less kind of fluctuations that happen compared to like the sex hormones and things like that. So thyroid testing, blood, good. Like a full blood draw, not like a blood, like, what did I say before? Like a spot test, those spot tests, which I think Everly does that, and some other, those are going to be a lot less reliable. So you want like the full blood draw, where you have to go into like LabCorp and things like that. And then for hormone specific, like sex hormones, things like that, knowing where you're at your cycle or your life. And then urine testing is going to be like the gold standard for that, on top of all the other things we just talked about. Was that a good summary?
That was a good summary.
Okay.
We talked saliva, a lot about blood and urine and saliva today, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I guess it's fine. I don't know. I'm a parent, so I deal with this stuff.
Honestly,
all the time,
a lot of people have these questions though. And
absolutely. And like I said, like we said, I mean, this stuff, it shouldn't be so complicated for the average woman to just kind of like get some answers on how to get the information she needs to optimize her health. But literally that's why this podcast exists, is because we are trying to make some of this stuff more accessible, or at least understanding the questions you need to ask, or the things you should be researching for yourself, because it can be really overwhelming and people don't even know where to start. And a lot of times people give up before they start because it is so difficult and complex and tricky. So anyway, I think that's definitely helpful. And I think if people, if you're listening and you're like, what? Or I have more questions, then that's why you send us a message, musclescienceforwomen@gmail.com. You can send us nice things there. You can send us stories. I think I asked like a couple weeks ago to send us like, I don't know if it was like funny gym stories or funny fitness stories or something. Remember? Because we were talking about like weights falling on your foot and me having like my butt out at a bodybuilding competition. So like, anyway, no one sent us anything funny, and that makes me sad. So send us some like funny fitness stories.
We also do the anonymous thing. We got to figure that out. There's like a link. I have it. People post all the time. It's like where you can send in anonymous questions.
Yes. Yeah. I do feel like that opens up like a lot
Why
of
don't we post that on our story for next time? I'm gonna make a note.
Find out. What? Post what?
Like if we post the link for anonymous questions, maybe we'll get something
interesting. Or instead of anonymous questions, because I don't know, the question thing might be weird, but like anonymous, like, I don't know,
anything,
stories or confessions or something. I don't know. Anywho,
oh boy, this could get interesting.
Today. That's it for today. It's got spicy at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you for
we'll
listening.
be back next time with Kristen. I don't want to leave you hanging. Kristen had another question about reference ranges and things like that, which is another very, very common question we get. So tune in for the next podcast. We'll dive into that.
Tune in. Until next time, don't do stupid shit.
Don't be insane.